Hello there, this is Benjamin from Virtual IoT/Eclipse. We're back for another edition of the Virtual IoT Meetup. I think we're actually closer to having meetups every week now. In any case, this is kind of a special edition. Today, this is all going to be about the recent IoT Developer Survey that the Eclipse Foundation organized together with a bunch of partners. I think this is the third time we're doing this. And today, this is going to be a whole bunch of Eclipse Foundation people commenting about the results. And we really want to hear from you guys about what you think about the results. We've really had lots of feedback and lots of respondents, but maybe you will agree or disagree with some of the findings. So today on the webinar is going to be my colleague Ian Scarrett. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good morning. Good morning.
And Roxanne is here as well. So yeah, we've been.
Roxanne's on mute, so we can't hear her. There she
yeah,
is.
she's
Hi.
Hi, Roxanne. So yeah, quick feedback for all of you guys already watching. The best way to reach out is commenting on YouTube. So any questions you have, any comments, please send them our way. We really want to kind of answer any concerns you may have regarding the results. You can also tweet about the meetup and or ask questions on Twitter using the virtual IoT hashtag. And yeah, without further ado, Ian, I think you have like a nice slide deck with basically the all the findings of the survey. So why don't you start going through the deck?
Okay, great. Thank you, Benjamin. And I think Roxanne's actually clicked a link to the slide deck on SlideShare. So if you want to follow along at home on your own version, feel free. So can everyone see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So thank you. And as Benjamin said, this is the second time the third time that we've actually done this survey, and we do it actually in collaboration with a number of other groups, and so we do it with the IEEE, with an EU research project called Agile IoT, and the IoT Council, which is a mailing list of some IoT influencers. And the reason why we do this is to kind of get the widest respondents base and kind of diversity of your respondents as possible. So it's always great to collaborate with these groups. Just kind of some kind of bit of information. So we fielded the survey in the month of February and March. We had 713 respondents, again from the different communities, and essentially we promoted the survey through our websites and our social media channels. IEEE did actually use their mailing list, which got a number of response from the IEEE mailing list. So it's a pretty diverse sponsor pool. The nice thing about this is the third time we've done this type of survey, so we can start to look at some comparisons, and we'll go through that in some of the details. But if you want to see the detailed reports from previous years, there are the links for you. So just quickly some key findings that we're going to go through. We're seeing a kind of interesting increase in different industries that are involved in IoT and participating. So we're going to go through some of that information. We ask about concerns. What are the developers concerned about? And security continues to be the primary concern. We're going to go through some of the numbers around interoperability and connectivity, and kind of what's not kind of showing up as a key concern. New this year, we actually asked what security technology people are using. I think we've got some interesting results there about kind of what people aren't doing, which is kind of concerning, but certainly things like communication, like TLS, DTLS, data encryptions are high up there. Programming language, we've got a lot more detail on programming languages this year. Kind of big differences, we broke them out of kind of what programming languages you use on constrained devices, gateways, and IoT cloud. In previous years, it was just kind of what's your IoT programming language, and I think kind of reality is that IoT is very polyglot, and that's definitely coming out in the survey. But we'll go through the details of that. Linux continues to be the primary operating system, but this year we actually asked what distros people are using. So some interesting feedback with Raspberry and Ubuntu being the key distros. And again, we asked what are the key cloud platforms for IoT. Not terribly surprising, but Amazon, Azure, and Google continue to be the top there. And finally, from the key highlights, we've always been asking about connectivity technologies that people are using, and we're seeing some interesting patterns in terms of growth in some of the new technologies that they're where the investment's going. And so we'll spend some time looking at that. So that's from a very high level. And again, we want to make this interactive. So as we go through some of the details, feel free to ask questions on Twitter and Google, and Roxanne and Benjamin will come in and interrupt. So we ask from experience, what are your experiences? And not a lot has changed here, but there's a number of people developing real IoT solutions. There's lots of people still researching and learning. And I think this is a natural progression that developers tend to learn on their own and bring that experience into their organization. From a company plan perspective, so we ask what's the personal experience and then the company plan, and we're seeing a lot of companies deploying IoT solutions today, and this is about stable from last year. So there's a number of companies deploying. There's lots of people planning to deploy. So there's lots of interest, and not terribly surprising. The people that are responding to the survey are active in their interest is active in IoT. So for key industries. We ask what industries their solutions are targeting, and IoT middleware, home automation continue to be the top. And this is, I think, pretty consistent with what we've seen last year. And if we go to the trends, and for some of the questions I've got, we had for what do we define as IoT middleware and platform? And to me, these are the technology vendors that are creating IoT solutions. So there's a number of people in this survey, and that's typical of the trends. I think of new technology. You get the technology vendors actively participating, building horizontal solutions, and then the industry verticals start to engage with them. And I think what we've seen this year is that some of the industry verticals are really coming on strong. So industrial automation, connected city, energy management in particular have come on strong there. And I think this is a good signal for the IoT community that we're getting more focus on vertical solutions, because in the end, it's got to be an application that people are deploying. It's not just middleware. And I know, Benjamin, like you and I have been talking about industrial automation being in particular, and it a key area for us. And so I think this is reflective of what we've seen in the working group too, right? At Eclipse, we're seeing more and more the industrials participate.
Right, and actually, I'm wondering, like, how long until we need to rephrase maybe some of the questions? Like a couple of slides ago, you were showing the results of how many people do build IoT solutions. I wonder how many people, for example, from the industrial automation world, is everyone really thinking they are building IoT, or are they just doing and taking industrial automation to the next level, right?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and terminologies is always a challenge. And long term, do we even talk about IoT? I guess, right?
Just like you don't talk about web or internet applications.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just IT.
Yeah. So, yes.
We have a question. Do we have a list of IoT platforms, and have we connected that list to standards supported and standards associations they support?
Yeah, no, we don't. So there are people out there that do track IoT platforms. Some analyst companies, I think, have reported there's over 300 IoT platforms, but that's not something that we covered off in this survey. So in terms of concerns, security continues to be the top concern. We asked the survey question, kind of, what are your top 2 concerns? And security, not surprisingly, continues to be the primary one. Interoperability, connectivity are the secondary. I think kind of one of the interesting things we're seeing this year is that it appears, and I want to say appears, that interoperability is the kind of the emphasis on interoperability is going down, and it's not a huge decrease, but it's certainly kind of trending that way. Benjamin, what kind of, do you see that yourself, or kind of how would you explain that?
Well, I think like, and you'll dive, I think, a bit deeper into connectivity, communication protocols, and the like. One thing that might explain that is that there's certainly way less fragmentation in terms of communication protocol than there used to be maybe 1 or 2 years ago, right? And maybe the likes of, I don't know, MQTT Co-op are really like scratching an itch and solving a problem in terms of interoperability, and people start to worry a bit less about how they're going to be able to make their things talk to each other. And I mean, like you said, it's a small trend, but it looks like there's a trend in it, and some standards and open standards out there are certainly an explanation, I guess.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think kind of on the security, kind of my pet peeve is still, I don't think we see enough innovation and investment in security around IoT. It still continues to be a concern that everyone talks about, but no one seems to be solving it. So, and we'll get to that kind of what technology people are using in later on in the presentation. So if we kind of skip ahead to kind of what are the technologies people are using? So we asked a series of questions on what people are actually using to build IoT solutions. And then the first one was around language solutions. And so we asked basically kind of by kind of stack. So what language do you use for building an application for constrained devices, IoT gateways, and cloud platforms, with the belief that it's very much a polyglot environment. The types of languages that was consistent, right? So we didn't ask every language out there, but we asked kind of a wide diversity of it, and people could add in kind of their own favorite language. But consistently, we see kind of Java, C, C++, Python, JavaScript come up as the key languages. And it's interesting because I think like there's lots of interest in things like Go and Swift as the up-and-coming language. It's just not showing up in this community yet. It's not to say that they're not popular and not going to be IoT language, but to me, it's something to watch, right? But it's not showing up right now. If we kind of go through kind of by kind of each stack, right? So constrained device, and this kind of confirms what I've seen, right? Is that C and C++ for kind of basically doing embedded development, right? Is not surprising. Kind of what we see there, where Java, Python, and then assembler kind of is also exist, right? So not terribly, and I think kind of things like JavaScript and Node.js kind of start to fall off. Then when you go to the gateways, Java jumps up, but C continues to be important. Python, C++ continue to be important. And then if you go to the cloud platform, this is where Java and JavaScript come up, and Node.js come up, and things like C, C++ fall right off, which to me isn't terribly surprising. It kind of represents, I think, kind of how people use different languages today, regardless of IoT. But I think it's kind of interesting to see it fleshed out in the data. Benjamin, what do you think here?
Yeah, I think one comment we had in the last few days is around why did we make a distinction between JavaScript and Node.js? I think maybe next year that's something we may want to get rid of. But essentially, by JavaScript, we meant like client-side JavaScript, the kind of code that you could use for example, for web development, and that you would combine with HTML and the like. Node.js was more server-side kind of JavaScript code. But like it's interesting to see that in total they are suddenly like showing number 2 and number 3. So there's suddenly lots of people doing JavaScript. Still also lots of kind of more confidential languages. It will be nice maybe over the years to see whether a language such as Go or R for data analytics will grow over time. There's actually a like on the topic of cloud, there's a question from Lawrence on what's our or can we point to a definition of IoT cloud? That's actually a good question. I don't know about you, Ian, but maybe one like the way we see it as within the Eclipse IoT community, the best way to describe and define it is probably highlighted in the white paper that we published late last year. So Lawrence, if you head over to iot.eclipse.org, you'll find our white paper with our take on the typical IoT architecture, where you have devices, gateways, and cloud. Yeah.
But in general, why don't we kind of just kind of for the audience, right? So to me, a constrained device. So let's kind of go through all three. To me, a constrained device is something like an MCU, so level device. So it's very small, doesn't have a lot of processing power. It's kind of fit for purpose, so a special purpose, right? You're not putting a lot of general purpose application code out there. A gateway is more has an application container, so you can actually put business logic out there. That's more multi-purpose. It's kind of certainly has more processing power, but it's running on a hardware device that's in the field. And then the IoT cloud is really, in my mind, is the layer. So it's basically in the cloud, so on the back end. And we were seeing more and more that you need certain services on the cloud to handle the telemetry data coming in and the management of the system, the devices that are out there. And that's really what's in the IoT cloud. And as Benjamin pointed out, that we've defined kind of the details of that in the white paper. Should we keep on going? Any more questions? Okay.
The questions coming though. That's great to make.
Yeah. These are great questions. So on operating systems, we asked the question, kind of, what operating systems you use, and kind of what I want to reinforce too is even back in the programming language question, it's multi-select, right? So you could select as many as are applicable, because it's kind of reflective of how things happen. And so what we asked here, the way we asked this question was the operating system for your constrained device and your IoT gateway. We did not ask the operating system for the cloud platform because it's, I don't think, really overly relevant. It's the kind of the platform provider that's more relevant than the operating system. And so and this is very consistent with previous years. Linux is the dominant operating system out there. Like, so it's no change there. But what I want to do though is look at, okay, there's a number of really interesting operating systems out there that are being developed for IoT. And so if you look at kind of take Linux out and look at the trending of all the other operating systems, you get kind of, this is some interesting kind of trends going on. Now, frankly, I can't explain why bare metal is going up. It might just be the way we asked the question this year, because it allow you to do a constrained device, and I think constrained device, there is more bare metal going on there, so it's kind of more top of mind for people. I think what is interesting though is Windows kind of really shot up this year, and been asked a couple of times, kind of, how do I explain that? One is, I think actually Microsoft's doing a really good job in IoT. I think they've put together some really compelling solutions in IoT, and frankly, people are using it, right? So, so I think that certainly shows is one potential there. I think that the other interesting thing is kind of what are the other ones? So I think things like FreeAutos in Kentucky are doing really well, and they're growing their community for that. Any thoughts here, Benjamin? Or?
Well, yeah, actually, we don't realize until just now that Windows was growing that fast. Yeah, interesting also to see the likes of Embed, Kentucky getting some growth over the years. Yeah, I mean, to maybe stress your point on the bare metal part, I think my guess is some people may have a hard time characterizing exactly what kind of system they're targeting when they do embedded. Like sometimes you take whatever the silicon vendor is providing you with in terms of tool chain, and you don't necessarily know what's underneath. It might be bare metal, it might be FreeAutos based. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah. So, so kind of looking at from constrained devices and gateways. So from a constrained device, I think to Benjamin's point, right, kind of, this is where the bare metal really shows up, right, where you actually don't know, you might not know what is on the MCU, or in fact there is no ROCOS there too. It shows up there. I think when you go to kind of the gateway, Linux is definitely more dominant, and this is where Windows starts to shine. So it's not terribly surprising there. So we also yes.
Lawrence is asking if the wording was different last time for Windows.
So what was different is you were asked to specify between constrained devices and IoT gateways. So last year we would just say what IoT operating system you're using. So a very similar question as for each year, but the way you were asked to respond was it was kind of a grid. Okay, so what operating systems are you using for constrained devices? What operating systems were you using for gateways? In previous years, there was just a general blanket statement.
Yeah, I remember now.
So new this year, we said, okay, if you're using Linux, what distribution do you typically use? And two popped way up, Raspbian and Ubuntu Core. And in general, just so people know, kind of the way the options were listed and worded is exactly what we have in the charts. So I don't think we changed many of these. There might be a few exceptions because it didn't fit on the charts, but in general, this is how they're listed. And so Raspbian and Ubuntu Core pop way up. I think kind of we don't have it in the deck, but if you look at some of the crosstabs of that, like so people that deploy or kind of said that their companies are deploying an application, something like Yocto would pop way up, kind of even higher. So it's I think there's like, so I think kind of some people are saying, well, Raspbian being way up there, does that mean everyone's deploying Raspberry Pis out there? I think there's a bit of kind of the way the questions were asked. You can't jump to that conclusion, right? It's because there's a lot of people that haven't deployed, but would still answer this question of that they're using Raspberry to kind of learn and develop their solution. I think Ubuntu is actually doing really well. I know Canonical has been spending a lot of time in IoT and pushing their solutions in IoT. And I think you can kind of look down through kind of Android, Yocto as being kind of some of the other ones. Any surprise here, Benjamin? Or?
Well, not really. Just to stress the point on going in production, and I think Paolo is also commenting on the YouTube chat on the same. Yeah, I mean, just like you said, Raspbian, or I would put Android things in the same bucket. I doubt that anyone is going production with Android things just yet. Yet it's interesting to see that people, at least 10% of the respondents, seems to be evaluating / using, to quote the question, Android things one way or the other. So yeah.
Yeah. So then we went in and actually new this year we talked about hardware architectures, and I'm not a hardware guy here, so I think certainly, and we asked between constrained devices and gateways, and so no surprise, the kind of ARM Cortex jump way up in for constrained devices. I think ARM's doing really well with their hardware platforms there. And then for gateways, this is where we see more of Intel. So to me, not a huge surprise. Benjamin, I don't know if you've kind of...
Well, I'm no hardware guy either, but maybe if you can quickly go back through to the previous slide. One way I look at it is that, and when I typically talk about like the devices, gateways, and cloud that you explained earlier, to me, the constrained devices, they really are where the billion of devices of the IoT are, right? And so when you build an IoT solution and you have 1,000 or million of those little things out there, money is going to be important. And so it's actually interesting to see that 8-bit MCUs and 16-bit MCUs, like super small, super tiny, and super cheap chips are showing up there. So like, yeah, people are also moving to more mature, more powerful architectures like the 32-bit ARM Cortex. But yeah, good old MCUs from the late 80s might still be a thing if you care about saving money.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it's if you're deploying millions of these devices, cost every penny starts to matter, right? So
yeah, and yes, they won't have like firmware upgrade and maybe not have like advanced security features, but maybe that's why gateways are for in many IoT architectures.
Yeah, that's a good point. So talking about security, hey, good lead-in. So new this year we asked kind of what security-related technologies do people use, and this is really driven by the fact that kind of as like a top concern has always been security. So we started to try and say, okay, well, what are people actually using for doing security? And I think it was Julien Vermeer kind of made the point where like, most of the kind of from these results, most people are using software. For software security related technologies. So kind of BTLS, TLS, data encryption, right? And I don't think this is a huge surprise. And I think it's probably related to mostly the kind of security between the gateway and the cloud. The question kind of becomes, okay, how are people kind of securing the devices, right? And is there security out? What is the security out on the edge? So I think there's a lot of room on kind of for growth and investment in that area that people still have a ways to go. I think one of the things kind of to me is over-the-air updates, right? And you see this kind of with kind of the kind of people getting into trouble with kind of refrigerators kind of being set up for denial of services, right? And the manufacturer can't actually update the stupid refrigerator with the security patch, right? So it was kind of a bit concerning that over-the-air update was so low, quite frankly, and also from an opportunity from the Eclipse community is like we provide some really good technology for doing over-the-air updates. So that's kind of an opportunity for us to communicate that better, I think. So, what do you think, Benjamin? Here.
Well, yeah, like I think the clear distinction between like people targeting and doing security using software as opposed to hardware is kind of, that's kind of natural to some extent. Software is probably the low-hanging fruit, and actually reassuring that people are at least using secured communication channels and the like. But yeah, I agree on the importance of over-the-air updates, and I think I will actually also be quoting Julian Vermeer on this. If you can't update it, well, you can't really secure it, right? You need to be able to patch the software over the air, and I hope that well, to your point, maybe next year, and maybe thanks to open source technology, people will be able to do and implement over-the-air update more easily over time, and it'd be interesting to see the trend next year.
For sure. So then we went into, and these are new questions this year too, went into a series, two questions about what, when you're building your IoT solution, what are the different kind of hardware and software components? Just to see kind of, okay, what are people putting together for their IoT solutions? And not a huge surprise that kind of sensors, actuators, gateways are kind of the key things. Like not a lot of kind of, when you look at kind of things, kind of some of the other hardware technology, it starts to taper off. So not a huge change, not a huge surprise to me there. On the software side, I think this is more, again, more intuitive. I think it's kind of shows things like machine learning, kind of voice recognition. There's lots of kind of, those are the growth areas, right, that you can see. But analytics is huge, right? Mobile application, I think, is certainly in the wearables and certainly in industrial, right? Is that's often the interface that people use. So I think that's kind of confirmation with that. Right.
Well, I don't know what you think, but I actually find it surprising, like in a positive way, that machine learning and computer vision are already so high, right? And like looks like there are more than just buzzwords, and people are actually already one way or the other, like doing machine learning and computer vision in their solutions. So that's interesting.
Yep. No, I agree. So. Then we go into kind of what cloud service people are using. And I think there's a question about kind of IoT cloud platforms or IoT platforms that kind of, did we survey that? This is probably the closest we got to. We weren't asking for just general cloud platform, it was more kind of the cloud services that people are offering. Right, and we didn't. So we specifically said Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure. We didn't say AWS IoT, Azure IoT. So that was on purpose, right? Like, because I think there's lots of people that host their IoT solution just on AWS. They're not using AWS IoT services. They're just hosting it on AWS. Same thing with Azure and Cloud Platform. So just to kind of drive home the point that we purposely just were looking at the general purpose and assuming that would be including AWS IoT in those numbers. Not a huge surprise here is AWS continues to dominate. I think that's kind of an industry and a kind of trend that is kind of reconfirmed here. Azure and Google's cloud platform. I think one of the, and kind of we've had asked this for the last 3 years. I think kind of what I got out of this was that the private on-premise went way down, and like usually when I see that big of a drop, it kind of just over 1 year I get a bit suspect. So I'm not exactly sure kind of why. One kind of theory could be is that these three vendors and all the vendor communities are actually doing a much better job of communicating how you can host your IoT solution on their cloud platform. And so people don't feel they have to rely upon private on-premise solutions. So I think that could be plausible there. But I think the key thing here is that kind of the main three and certainly IBM too are doing quite well in this area.
I think also to the point of interoperability earlier. I think it's less and less true that when you start, say, on Amazon, your basically locked in, right? Not that I want to plug Amazon in any way. I think it's true for all the major vendor platforms. They start building on top of open standards like Kubernetes and Docker and whatnot. And it, like, if you do the math, I think it makes sense to, like, price in terms of pricing and so on, the cost of ownership of a private cloud versus moving your bits to the public cloud is making more and more sense for people, right? And maybe that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. So connectivity protocols. So I think so we've asked this for the last 3 years, and we kind of, frankly, we do mix technologies here, so it's not apples to apples. I appreciate. Certainly, kind of the primary protocols have been TCP/IP and Wi-Fi, and kind of this is the trend chart. So that's not terribly surprising. But what I thought was interesting this year is that if you look at some of the areas where people are actually kind of investing in, okay, we've got an IoT protocol, right? So the kind of the Bluetooth community, the whole low power WAN community, so Sigfox, LoRa, right, and then just 6LoWPAN, right? We are seeing actually more adoption of those technologies. They are making an impact, certainly with the Bluetooth and Bluetooth Smart. They are seeing increased adoption. So I think that's a kind of a good validation of the work that's being done there. I also kind of, so I think Thread is the exception, quite frankly, right? Yeah, their numbers are growing, which is good, but they still have a long ways to go to really grow their community in the IoT developer community. But things like cellular, Zigbee, right? They're pretty static, right? We're not seeing a lot of growth there. So when you're out in the hacker community and the maker community, Benjamin, what are people using? What do you think?
Well, I think this like the findings sort of reflect what seems to happen on the field, like especially in the last 12 months, everyone, and the LPWA, like there's lots going on and falling in that bucket. Maybe actually next year we'll want to split this. Like, yes, there's lots happening in the LoRa community, and like people at the Things Network, they're doing a great job at helping the hacker community use and leverage LoRa. But the big standard guys are also doing great progress with LTM and BIoT, I think, was also part of that list. So that's certainly not surprising to see this grow. And also, to my point earlier of like billion of devices, you really want to connect those with low cost and scalable connectivity solutions. And yeah, 6LoWPAN and everything LPWA certainly fall in that category. Yeah, well, and yeah, to continue on that point, I think next year also we'll want to be maybe more accurate in terms of qualifying what we mean by cellular. There's kind of a convergence between cellular and LPWA to some extent. So
sure,
yeah.
Yeah. So we asked about messaging protocols. HTTP and MQTT, kind of over the last 3 years, we've asked that, have always been the top. I think, so frankly, I think there's certainly around MQTT, there's a bias in our community because we kind of have PAHO and Mosquito, and but I think, but if you look at just in the general industry, I think it's MQTT is definitely up there with HTTP. Like if you just from a middleware perspective, and kind of the adoption of MQTT is certainly outstripped anything else that I've seen. That being HTTP is absolutely the key standard still for IoT. And I think co-op is doing well. Like I don't think I have a trend chart here, but co-op continues to do well. And frankly, most other things aren't growing that much, right? They're about where they were about 3 years ago. And so and maybe this is back to the interoperability discussion that we had, Benjamin, right? Is people are seeing kind of for messaging at least, right? HTTP and MQTT and co-op is sufficient.
Yeah, looks like at least like the list is pretty short at least, and what I would be interested in over the next few years will be to see whether HTTP2 takes off. I think what will be interesting as well will be to see the impact of the new versions of the MQTT standards on its adoption. I think there are long outstanding issues that they finally fixed or at least addressed, and will be nice to see whether this has an impact over time.
For sure. We asked about industrial protocols, and actually, so Benjamin, you and I had this conversation yesterday about kind of what does none mean, and I think none definitely means not applicable, right? So in this case, and that's something we need to fix in the future. So frankly, like if you look at just kind of the focus on industries, kind of one of the first questions that we showed, right? There's a lot of people that aren't focused on industrial automation in the industrial side, so it's not surprising that this none is so high. If that kind of Modbus and CAN bus, right, are definitely kind of the dominant ones here when people do know kind of what they're using. So not a lot new there. We asked about text editors, kind of what and IDEs that people are using. I admit that there's going to be a bias here, right? Because from the Eclipse community, but frankly, if you looked at I did the analysis of just the IEEE community, right? So it wasn't coming from Eclipse, and Eclipse was still #1, right? It certainly wasn't as dominant, but it was still #1. So I thought kind of their Arduino ID being second.
I think we lost Ian. Ian, if you can hear us, maybe this is just your headset died on you. We can't hear you anymore, so hopefully you will be able to join us soon. In the meantime, let me try and take over, just hoping you will be able to dial back real quick. Well, now that settles it. We lost you and you will be back, hopefully. I was planning on using your slide deck.
You just joined.
Are you back, Ian?
It's there.
All right, so I will be trying to share the slide deck real quick. I just need to get it back. All right, so we were on the IDE. And do that. All right. Sorry guys for the interruption. Hopefully it'll be just a minute.
If you have questions, it would be the time to ask, and I'll note them down, and at the end, we'll ask them.
Well, yeah, actually, that's a good point. There was, off the top of my head, there was one question, and welcome back, Ian. Let's see if we can hear you. Yes, we can. So, yeah, just you can take a few seconds maybe to open the slide deck again, and I will briefly answer one short question I saw from Liam. Do we see real-world uses of co-op to HTTP proxying? I don't know about like the specific details, and like but one thing we see for sure is co-op being used in the context of the lightweight M2M standard, right? And there's lots of platforms out there and vendors that that certainly leverage lightweight M2M, and one way or the other use it to get an HTTP API, if you will, to interact with their devices and have a standard way to do so. That's a short answer on this, and I think Ian is back. So let's see if we can hear you. I think we can.
Yeah, so can we hear me?
Yes.
So I'm just trying to prove a fact that you need some type of gateway that you can buffer the messages. So once if you lose network connection, you're not losing all the important information that you can finally get it up, right? So
what you're saying is that I'm bad at doing the gateway because I managed to switch in just a minute I had. That's all right. You're back. That's good.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
it's open hardware. So I think we see this over and over again, where developers are learning on their own time. They're accessing kind of using things like Arduinos, Raspberry Pis. They're using open source technology just to experiment. But more and more, we're actually seeing companies actually prototyping with this too. And so these are incredibly important platforms to target and to enable. And I think we can continue to see this in the data. Let me just. So just kind of finally finishing up on some kind of industry perceptions. We ask about open source participation, and lots of people are using open source technology in their IoT solution, which is great to see. People are experimenting. There's committers, and this is certainly from our community, my guess. But there certainly seems to be a good amount of engagement around open source in IoT, which we certainly like to see, and I'm going to take credit for it too. So because we spend a lot of time on this, we ask kind of just an open-ended kind of who are the leaders in IoT from a developer perception, and this. I think this has been pretty consistent, right? So, and these are actually kind of in ranked order. So kind of IBM and Amazon turn up consistently near the top. Intel and Google are very influential, and then companies like Cisco, Bosch, and Microsoft are top of mind for developers. And so it's kind of interesting to see. I'm not going to go through the response, but just so people know, if you want to know kind of the demographic information, it's there. Kind of region too, and then we go into some really detailed information about the difference between the IEEE and Eclipse community. But I want to leave it there, and certainly let's open it up to questions. And Benjamin, if you have any final comments that you wanted to do, are there questions?
Yeah, I think there's actually lots of questions, and okay. I don't have much comments that I think won't be answered with the questions. Roxanne, did you want to start maybe with Patrick's question?
Yeah, so Patrick asked, do we provide Eclipse IoT examples, tutorials representing the most used architectures and the most used programming languages?
So Ian, do you want to take a stab at it, and how people in our community are typically using or reading and using the results of the surveys we did over the years?
Okay, well, I was going to ask, maybe I misunderstood the question, but I think from our perspective, like from a tutorial perspective, we have, and Benjamin, you actually create the tutorials around using things like Eclipse Cura and Paho and Mosquito. So we do our best to get out there that type of information. It's not language, well, it's language dependent on the project. So it doesn't kind of directly correlate to what's in the survey, but there are tutorials out there.
And on the architecture front, there's also so like I was mentioning earlier, we've been working on a white paper on IoT architectures a few months back, and we are surfing on this sort of by means of working with our community to create test beds for Eclipse IoT technology in action. And the point is really to show people how the technology is applicable to specific verticals. Think, I don't know, smart automation, smart home, asset tracking, and whatnot. So there, our member companies and our community is working on identifying what languages are best suited, what open source products, what commercial solutions maybe as well. So yeah, you should certainly stay tuned, especially like in the next few days. There will be some news and some test beds being announced, and that will be also one other way to learn more about.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So that's very, very concrete examples, actually.
Yeah. So another question is from Juan. He's asking, do you have any ideas about which are the main entry barriers or the most challenging issues for novices that are doing IoT software development?
You take that, Benjamin.
Well, if you read between the lines of some of the findings, I guess, like, what are the top concerns for people? If you remember at the very beginning, we said like things like security, things like interoperability. So when you are a beginner, it's actually still difficult, I believe, to make sure that you make the right choices when it comes to choosing what protocol you will use for communication, and or what standard you need for modeling your data semantics and whatnot. So over time, I think that the industry will be and is maturing, and some of the trends in the survey show that. But yeah, I think security and interoperability might still be an issue. I don't know if there's anything we could take from the results around the IDEs. Maybe there's also some challenges that still need to be solved around the maturity of the tools for IoT development. How do you simulate your IoT solutions? How do you debug them, etc.? But yeah, Ian, do you have any additional thoughts?
Well, I think kind of if the question is more kind of a novice, not kind of just trying to figure out how to use the Raspberry Pi, what I would suggest is start with something like a Raspberry Pi. I think Benjamin's done that kind of a bill of materials, what kind of sensors and SD cards that you need in the tutorial, and to set up your hardware environment. I think often what I read about is people getting the hardware set up properly is sometimes the first step, right? And then kind of downloading the software. So finding good tutorials on hardware setup for novice users is certainly where I'd recommend starting.
All right. The next question is from MyOctopus. Is there any data on developer preferences re IoT devices APIs? Likes, dislikes, bugbears?
Yeah, I don't know of any for kind of evaluating APIs. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know of any surveys data that does that, and we certainly don't do it. Like the closest we would do is kind of the protocols, right? So the messaging protocols and connectivity protocols, right? So it's we don't go into kind of a lower level than that.
Yeah, well, and my guess is that on the likes versus dislikes, developers would certainly like when there is an API for the device, and when the API is documented, and when the device is not some kind of black box that relies on proprietary protocols and whatnot. So, yeah.
A well-documented API is always preferred.
Yes.
And one last question. From Naima. I work in IoT prototyping, and we have recently used particle devices and the particle cloud. Where do they stand among the commercial devices and cloud? So maybe we could add them to the question next year.
Sure. Yeah, we can. There's such a wide range of devices out there that when we put together the survey, we usually go out to our community sponsors and kind of ask for, okay, what are you seeing to get a representation. And I also actually look, all the questions will have other, and we also go back and say, okay, what what else should have we listed based on the other comments, so you can try and do analysis of that and add them in. We can certainly kind of think about adding particle next year.
Yeah, but I haven't seen it like listed that much in the other section.
Yeah, that's true.
Those are all the questions we have today.
Okay. Should we
Well,
give
if
them
people have
chance?
more, I mean, the YouTube video will be open for comments like virtually forever. So please make sure to stay engaged there. We'll be happy to take more questions. I think as a kind of a companion as well to the slide deck, Ian has put together a blog post that also summarizes some of the findings. So you can also engage the discussions there.
Yep, and you can also reach us on Twitter, and Benjamin and I are on Twitter, and we can certainly respond to questions at a later date. But thank you everyone for your interest. It's a lot of work to put together these surveys, but we always get really good feedback and get good response. And my hope is that this is a useful resource to the wider IoT industry. It's just one data point, right? So it's not kind of the definitive, right? But I always look at kind of how these types of surveys, how you compare them to what you see in the industry, and what can you learn from them. And I always learn lots each year. So thank you for everyone who actually participated and provided the feedback. It was great help. So. And Benjamin, thank you. Actually, this is the first time I've done a webinar with you for a long time, so we should do it again.
We should do it more. So yeah, that was great. So that was our virtual IoT meetup talking about the IoT Developer Survey. We will actually be very busy this May. For those of you attending Red Hat Summit next week, you can come and join the Eclipse IoT community. There we'll be showing some cool stuff, in particular around the testbeds that I was mentioning earlier. A couple of weeks later, we'll be at IoT World. And yeah, the reason I'm basically saying that is that we won't be back until May the 31st for our next virtual IoT meetup. If you haven't RSVP'd yet, please do so. We're going to talk about stream and even processing for IoT with some cool open source technology as well. As always, if you have comments on the meetup and feedback, there's a way for you to review and give feedback on meetup.com so that we can improve and provide content and webinars that you're interested in. And with that, I think that's a wrap. It was maybe slightly longer than usual. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Roxanne, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you next time.